Hello and welcome to the Happy Scientist podcast from Bitesize Bio. If you want to become a happier, healthier and more productive scientist, you are in the right place. I am Nick Oswald, the founder of bitesizebio.com, and with me is the driving force of this podcast, Mr. Kenneth Vogt. In these sessions, we'll hear mostly from Ken on principles that will help shape you for a happier and more successful career. And along the way, I'll pitch in with points from my personal experience as a scientist and from working with Ken. Today, we are discussing how to hotwire your to-do list for maximum progress. Okay, Ken, tell us all about it.
All right. So today we're going to talk about a matrix that only has two factors. That is, things that are urgent and things that are important. So you can picture this where important is on the y-axis and urgent is on the x-axis, and it ends up creating four quadrants. So either something is either urgent or it's not, and it's either important or it's not. So you can have four combinations of that. You can have something that is urgent and important. You can have something that is important but not urgent. You can have something that is urgent but not important. And finally, you can have something that is neither urgent nor important. And the fact is, if you look at your to-do list for any given day, you're probably going to see all four of those quadrants represented. And so you got to figure out, well, how do I prioritize what I'm going to do any given day, any given week, any given month? And you can use this matrix to decide what should show up where. And you can also use it to decide whether or not something should even stay on the list. And there's lots of ways to deal with your to-do list. Some of it comes down to, managing your own time, but some of it comes down to well, maybe it's tasks that I personally shouldn't do, but I should delegate, or I should ask for help with. And when I say delegate, I mean that can be to a subordinate, but you can delegate up too. You can delegate something to your boss if it's appropriate, or it can be a lateral move to a colleague. So that there's lots of ways to look at that stuff. But it may shake out a little different than you imagine, because when you at first blush, you might think urgent and important. Well, if something's urgent, it must be important. No, not at all. A 3-year-old tugging at your pant leg is urgent, but is it important? Almost certainly not. So you have to look at things and see them clearly for what they are. So to do that, the first thing we probably need to do is to define what is urgent and what is important. So when something is urgent, the way you'll know it's because first off, it requires immediate attention. It is screaming for something to be done right now. And it generally involves short-term thinking. And as a result, it involves suboptimal decision-making. Because it's demanding is what's going on. It's generally less significant compared to long-term goals because it's just about right now. And things that are happening right now can go away very, very quickly and vaporize in value very quickly. And finally, if it's urgent, it's time sensitive. And the time duration is usually short. That is, it's, you have to do it in the next 20 minutes. You have to do it today. It has to be done this week. Whatever you're considering as short term for this particular task or item. So these are the things that describe something that's urgent. Well, how does that differ from something that's important? Okay, well, something that's important requires initiative and it requires proactiveness. So it goes a little more in depth. It's not that it's screaming for attention right now, but it's it's going to require quality attention. Something that's important involves dedicated, focused time to do quality work. Some urgent things that you do, you can do practically on autopilot. When you change lanes, you automatically just put on your turn signal. You don't even think about it. Well, at least some of you do. There are a lot of activities like that where if it's important, you have to think about it. You got to get engaged with it. You can't have something else going on at the same time that's drawing your attention away. It needs your full focus. Important things, they engage long-term strategic thinking. So it's not just about the moment. And when I say strategic thinking, I mean it might not be just a knee-jerk reaction. You may have to coordinate it with other things. It may require a change in focus. And again, this is about what it makes to make something important. And finally, if it's important, it'll have a large impact on success. When I talk about success, I'm talking about long-term success. I'm talking about success of the project, success of your career. It's stuff that's a big deal that will ultimately matter to a large extent whether or not you succeed. So those are the differences between something that's urgent and important. Now, you probably noticed in that conversation that these things aren't mutually exclusive. It isn't that it's either urgent or important. Things can be both, or it can be just one of them, or it can be more of one of them. So when I say we divide this into quadrants, that is not to say that there aren't continuums on both the x-axis and the y-axis. There are. Some things are vitally important and other things are kind of important. Some things are screaming urgency and others are just naggingly urgent. So you still gotta factor it in as to where things land for you. But we're going to break it down into these 4 quadrants, not because they are the end all and be all truth of the matter, but because they're practical and it'll help you get an idea of what to do with these things that are on your list. So I'm gonna go through these quadrants in a certain order, and I'm doing it on purpose this way because you'll see how just because something is landing in a certain quadrant doesn't mean it needs to stay there. And in fact, it might be valuable to move it into a different quadrant by choice. So it does come down to how you assess things. Again, with that 3-year-old tugging on your pants leg, it's urgent to the 3-year-old, but it might not be urgent to you. And we've all seen this with a mother that's got a little kid at her knee, and the kid's really screaming for attention, and the mother doesn't seem to even notice because it's urgent to the child, but it's not urgent to the mother. So you get to have your own views about these things, but it is noteworthy that other people might view it different. So you may have people that are insisting that something is important because it's urgent to them. Or you might have people that are insisting that something is important that you believe is not important. It means you're going to have to communicate perhaps with others about these things and get on the same page. But it will impact where you choose, what quadrant you choose to put it in. Now, if your boss is insisting something is important and you cannot sway them otherwise, well, you're probably going to need to treat it as important, even if you don't agree. So, just something to think about there. So the category that would seem to demand the most attention, the quadrant, would be what we'll call quadrant 1, which is something that is both important and urgent. And it would seem like, well, yeah, that my whole to-do list every day, that should be what's on it. Things that are important and urgent. But consider this. If things are important and urgent, I'm going to suggest that you should reduce the number of things that are there. And I'm going to suggest you reduce them for a couple of reasons. One is because that leads for a really, really stressful day. Now, if you're an emergency room doctor, stress a stressful day is normal. But chances are in a lab, that's not exactly how you want it to be. And if things are falling in this quadrant, it's because they're in crisis. And you'll find yourself in crisis management all the time because things are urgent and important. What you want to do is you want to try and move those items into quadrant 2, which is the quadrant where things are important but not urgent. So, what's the difference? Same tasks. Why would something be important and urgent? And why might it be important but not urgent? Well, the only difference is timing. Did you get in front of things? Did you deal with it before it got urgent? Because in many cases, the fact that something is urgent isn't because an emergency popped up. It's because you failed to deal with it before this. You could have dealt with this thing that's still important. It hasn't changed in importance, but you could have dealt with it before it got urgent. And if you had done that, things would be less stressful. Now, the beauty of dealing with things that are when they're important but not urgent is because you can be more strategic about it. You can plan, but to do that, it requires initiative. You gotta make things happen before urgency puts a gun to your head. It's a matter of demand. If you only do things when you're pressured to, when you're forced to, you are introducing a lot of stress into your own schedule. So you can get around that by dealing with things sooner. Now, at the beginning, that's going to take a little bit of commitment, because if you're sitting there with a to-do list or most things are important and urgent, you get all that pressure there, and now I'm supposed to do things that are important and not urgent. Now I'm going to add that to my list. I'm like, well, you got there because you didn't add that to the list before. So yes, at the beginning, you're going to have to knuckle under a little, and you're going to have to get ahead of the curve. And don't kid yourself that that's not possible. Because it seems like, it's just impossible. There's no way I can do everything. Well, you know what? You still have the things that are important and urgent on your list, and you manage to do those. So start realizing you've made it important and urgent to move things to the quadrant that is important but not urgent. So it's the same pressure. Nothing's changed. But if you start to make the moves and you get something out there, it gets easier. Your quadrant 1 work will lessen. And then if you get something else out there, it gets easier again. So you'll find a lot less stress in your normal schedule, and you'll find you're getting important things done. And that feels good. When something is important and urgent, yes, of course it feels good to get it done. But it feels more mature to do things that are important and not urgent. You're going to feel more capable, more responsible. And that is a very, very good feeling. If you're not accustomed to having that feeling, you're missing out. Get in the zone where you feel like you're ahead of the curve, and you're going to feel so much better. So now let's talk about things that are not important. Should you never do things that are not important? Well, that's not exactly true, because sometimes things are urgent and not important. What you can do with those things, though, is go, okay, this does need to be done. It's calling for attention. But is it the best use of my time? Well, if it's not important, and I'm saying not important for you to do, well, then see if you can get it done by somebody else. And it might just be a matter of asking for help. And I know for a lot of folks, that's a hard thing to do. I don't like to ask for help, but understand this is about getting the most strategic benefit, whether that's for your personal career or for the project that you're working on or for the lab that you're in, the group that you have. All of them can benefit by this. If you're spending time doing things that are urgent but not important, it will take away from the things in quadrant 1 and quadrant 2, which are important and urgent, and important and not urgent. In other words, you won't do as much important stuff, and you should. And sometimes it isn't so much asking your boss to do it for you, but asking your boss to take it off of you. They may well assign it to somebody else, and it might make more sense because it might actually be important for somebody else. Now, if it's important for them, well, then they're going to need to take it on. Now, there are times when you're going to get assigned things that for you are urgent but not important, but they are important for other people. And being aware that it's important for someone else is useful. And, then you can make a decision about that. You can make a choice. Well, even though this isn't that important to me, it is important to my colleague, to my boss, even to my subordinate. And if it's going to make someone else's life easier and is going to advance them in some fashion, that may well be worth the cost of doing it. It's just, don't spend all your time there doing things that are urgent but not important for you, or you're just not going to get anywhere. And delegation is probably your best answer to getting out of having a lot of those tasks. Now, we're all going to have those. It's stuff's going to pop up, and somebody else is going to be in a panic to have something, and you're gonna take one for the team. You're going to do something to benefit the other person, because that's a favor that may well be returned one day, and it's worthwhile. You're going to do something that'll make your boss look good. It's great. There's nothing wrong with doing those things that some people would consider politics. But keep in mind that the word politics has the same root word as the word policy. So if it's your policy to be helpful to other people, to be useful to your boss, that's beneficial to you. So it can kind of move something into the realm of being important. All right. So the fourth quadrant is the quadrant where things are neither important nor urgent. If you have something on your list that is not important and not urgent, you need to be asking yourself, why is this still on my to-do list? You got to declutter that. And by the way, there is probably an answer to that why question. And the answer often is because it's easy, because it's familiar, and sometimes I just need a simple task where I can check the box and feel like I accomplished something. That is not great motivation. When you can check the box that you've done something important, it is so much better than just checking the box because you did something. So, you really want to declutter your to-do list of those kind of things. Get rid of them. If they're not supporting the mission and the goals of your lab, if they're not advancing your career, if they're not helping your group, if they're not aiding the project, you got to get rid of them. You got to speak up. And sometimes you have those things because they've been assigned to you. Well, if something like that has been assigned to you, you have got to speak up for yourself. You got to say, hey, why am I doing this? You want me to do X, but we have so-and-so to do X. And it doesn't need to be me. Or we shouldn't be doing X at all, ever. Nope. And even so-and-so shouldn't be doing X because it's a waste of time, or it's a waste of resources, or we could be using them in a better fashion. Or in your own case, my time would be better spent if I were doing this instead of that. So you can make the case to yourself, obviously, but you can also make the case to a boss or to a project lead or a PI or whoever is advancing something. And a lot of this comes down to just getting clarity about what's the strategy and what's the objective here, and getting everybody on the same page. Communication is going to matter when it comes to these quadrants, because at some point you may argue that something's not important, and someone will argue back that it is important, and they'll make the case. Well, now then you'll have to change how you look at it. Sometimes people will argue about urgency because they're just high strung and everything looks urgent to them. Well, maybe you can calm them down on that. Or maybe you're the high strung one. Maybe you're calling too many things urgent that aren't actually urgent. So it is important that the assessment you make of the importance of something and the assessment you make of the urgency of something is accurate. And that's up to you. So these are the 4 quadrants. If you find you can get more stuff into quadrant 2 where things are important and not urgent, you're going to have a much better career. You're going to have a much better year, a much better week, a much better day if you can live there. There's nothing wrong with urgent and important. That happens. It's just a little more stressful. And it's okay to have some things that are urgent but not important if it's advancing something valuable to yourself or somebody who's important to you. And it's never okay to be doing things that are neither important nor urgent. They're a waste of your time. You are pretending you're being productive if you do stuff like that and try to pat yourself on the back for it. So, save yourself from that. And save yourself from telling others that you're accomplishing things by doing things that are neither important nor urgent, because you know what? They'll notice. They will realize all you do is busy work. You're not actually doing anything that's advancing the mission of the operation of the project, of the lab, or whatever group you're in. So that's the rundown on how to hotwire your to-do list for maximum progress. So what do you think, Nick?
So plug it into quadrant 2. That's what to do. Your to-do list. That's quite interesting. So if you look at it from what you're doing in the lab on a day-to-day basis, then the things that are important are the things that move your research forward, obviously. So anything that's not important is things that doesn't move your research forward. It's stuff that, is either expendable or, it doesn't necessarily contribute to the main thing of getting more results, figuring out what they mean, publishing, getting funding, all that stuff. So it's basically you're looking at. It's quite funny that this aligns with quite well with the Pareto principle. Most of the benefit comes from 20% of the work you do, and so try and do more of that 20%, which is basically that. What you're trying to do is
says that you get 80% of the value from 20% of the work.
From 20% of the work, yeah.
Yeah. Although current research says it's actually a way more than that. So in other words, you might get 90% of the benefit from 10% of the tasks, or you might get 95% of the business from 5% of the tasks. That's so. I mean, it's really powerful.
Yeah. And so that one way to look at that is that most of the stuff you're doing is not in quadrant 2.
Right.
Probably not. Most of the stuff that people do is not in quadrant 2. And well, I mean, that's also going to be about execution as well in quadrant 2, if you're looking at experiments and so on.
Well, but it goes to show
it's quite interesting.
If you're spending a lot of your time in quadrant 1, well, you can get far more productive by moving things to quadrant 2. If you're spending a lot of your time in quadrant 3, you're probably not getting anything much done. And if you're spending time in quadrant 4, you're a waste of oxygen. So you got to look at that's where you are, but you can see if you move from quadrant 4 to quadrant 3, you still moved up. If you go from 3 to 1, you moved up, but 1 to 2 is the best.
Probably should it not be quadrant 1 and quadrant 2 swapped in terms of how good?
I thought about that as I was saying it, but it's like this is kind of an established thing. So
sure. Yeah, we break it. But again, you want to get into quadrant 2, so you want to be spending most of your time doing, calmly planning experiments, not rushing them, calmly setting them up, calmly doing them, calmly processing the results or noting the results,
Well,
calmly
yeah, and this
making
this comes
notes.
true too for
You know,
how for designing experiments or even choosing experiments, whether you should or should
exactly.
not do a particular experiment.
Well, yeah. But one thing you don't want to do is, you don't want to do an unimportant experiment, one that doesn't move things forward. But you also don't
Right.
want to do an important experiment and rush it,
Mm-hmm.
because then, what's the point? Then you're much less likely to have a success.
Yeah. Urgency introduces problems. So if you're experiencing urgency, it's kind of a warning signal. It doesn't mean it's a disaster, but it still puts things at risk.
Yeah, and I say that as a person who lives in quadrant 1, and it's not a good thing, as you know. It's an addiction, and you get
He's too
addicted
hard
to the
on him,
stress of it.
folks.
And
Yeah, on himself, folks. He has lived in quadrant 1. He's doing better.
I'm a bit better, but I tend to be attracted like a moth to a flame to quadrant 1.
Well, yeah, urgency
But
screams for
yeah,
attention.
yeah,
It's just how it
it
is.
does. Yeah, but again, if
Yeah.
you're in that quadrant 1 where you're rushing everything, or
Mhm.
you're there's no, I mean, this feeds into so many topics, like taking time to sit back and just look at what you're doing, or not do anything. Or important and not urgent is rest time,
Mhm.
and is contemplation time, and is planning time, and is slow setup time, and is discussing time. It's all in there, and quadrants 1 to 4, 3, and 4 will eat all of that, and
Oh
put
yeah.
you in that either unproductive when you're at the bottom of that list, or quadrant 3 and 4, or stressed out and making mistakes in quadrant 1.
And
So
by the way, if
interesting.
you're hearing this by audio and you're thinking I can't keep it straight, it'll be in the show notes, so it's all laid out and written in a simple format.
Yeah.
You may find that quadrant 2 doesn't arise organically. You pretty much have to make quadrant 2 a reality. Quadrant 1 will arise by itself. Quadrant 3 will arise by itself, and quadrant 4 will arise by itself. But number 2, you got to make it happen. But if you bother to make it happen, your everything gets better. You get more clarity. You accomplish more. You will expend less energy for the valuable output you get. So it's worth making the commitment to it.
So that is the take-home message: is to stay focused on creating space for important tasks to be tackled in a non-urgent way.
Exactly.
Great, I'm writing it down. As usual. Okay, thank you, Ken, for that. So, as Ken said, the show notes for the show will show the quad. Will give you a quadrant diagram that you can use to refer to. But you can use to refer. Maybe you want to go back and listen to what Ken said there. You can find the show notes at bitesizebio.com/the happy scientist, and go to episode 54, and it will be on that page. And the other thing to say is that we have a Facebook page, facebook.com/the happy scientist club. Over there, you can find us, hook up with us, ask us questions, and tell us how you're doing in the 4 quadrants and adhering to the 4 quadrants. So we'd love to see you over there. So it just leaves me to say thank you, Ken, for another great episode, and good luck to everyone in hotwiring their to-do list.